Good evening. Holy crap, folks. Hyperpsychotronica is real, and I can't prove it, or even describe to you what it is, but there sure is a name for it. Am I joking? Am I for realsing? Does it even matter, Ing? Maybe I'm doing something altogether different. Maybe I'm hyperpsychotronicizing. Well, as long as I tread a fine line between completely incoherent gibberish and only partially incoherent gibberish, then it works. Excuse me, I read that wrong. I meant to say wonks. Then it wonks. Now, for anyone who has never seen this show before, no, this is not a show that's full of nonsense, believe it or not. It's really a show that attempts as much as possible to make sense. We talk about facts, we talk about figures, we try to talk about things in a way that makes sense. This is to say, we are attempting to communicate effectively about UFOs. But that's pretty difficult because UFOs are unexplained. Most of what we can talk about isn't unidentified flying objects themselves, because if something doesn't have a name, if it hasn't been identified, if it hasn't been explained, then how does one talk about it? So, these little prologues of mine, they are often abstract or expressionistic ways of getting closer to UFOs. They're satire, they're poetry, they're magical incantations, and oftentimes they are, well, nonsense. And that's not because I'm just horribly failing at what I've set out to do, believe it or not. It's because we cannot simply approach this topic from a quantitative standpoint. We must also touch on our human experience, feelings, well-being, and all of the qualitative aspects of our relationship to UFOs. We who most of the time are not ourselves UFOs, because we are not just a nuts and bolts craft. I am not just a philosophical zombie. The things that we do, the things we communicate, are always biased by our individual perspectives and motivated by our goals and desires. One cannot remove their biases by pretending they're not there, and simply speaking with confidence doesn't make what one says correct. I am not an expert, and it is impossible for me or anyone else, for Jeff, for Luis, for the people in the chat, to speak from a purely objective standpoint. We are all subjects. At least nonsense, true nonsense, isn't trying to bolster a perspective, doesn't defend a particular argument, and has no underlying motivations or attachments. True nonsense, by definition, cannot be made sense of. It can't be explained or reduced. At times, you just gotta respect the baloney. I mean, I suppose you don't have to, of course. I could go out during golden hour and look up at the sky, and upon seeing its transcendental beauty, the colors that defy all explanation, the quality of the light, upon experiencing the indefinable scent of the air, be like, what? Are you kidding me? Jeez, I mean, seriously? That makes no sense. Like, what even is this? Like some sort of a UFO sunset or something? I wrote that on Friday. Before the days of UFOs, they had unexplained meteors, so for short, UM. And look out, it's imminent, it's in plain sight, it's skinwalkers at the Pentagon, it's UFOs, generals, pilots, and government officials go on the record. That's right, folks, disclosure is finally never going to happen. Plus, the aurora. What? How could that possibly be as interesting as Jeremy Corbell talking about something? Baloo, baloo, bia, baloo, boo, beep, boo, blue, aha, boo, 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 bloob. Due to really just not feeling emotionally up to the task because balloons are terrifying, my balloon piece for this episode will be delayed until the next UFOs. UFOs number 14. All this and more tonight. I'm Rachel Nelson, FBI.
I'm Jeff Knox with the National Security Agency. No, just kidding.
Welcome to Ufo Sunset. And now for the rebrief. A new species of mantis has been identified. A paper was published on Friday in the Biodiversity Data Journal with lead author Qinpeng Liu at the China Agricultural University in Beijing, which describes a new species of praying mantis. Praying mantises are a diverse order of insects with males that are commonly able to fly using two sets of wings. The new species, Phyllothelis chinginum, belongs to the genus Phyllothelis, which includes over 20 species, many native to China. The new species is endemic to Yunnan province and was identified using a method called integrated taxonomy. This is a complex method that uses various different approaches to identify a cryptic species, or a species that goes unidentified because it looks very similar to other related species in the same region. Integrated taxonomy includes approaches such as looking at the morphology of an animal specimen, or the form of the animal's body, an animal's genetic makeup, and the geographical distribution of related species, or where different populations of an animal lives. In integrated taxonomy, approaches like these are used together to identify cryptic species. The purpose of this is to better understand biodiversity in a region. As an example, in late September, a study of mouse lemurs in Madagascar was published in the journal Nature Ecology and Evolution, which also used integrated taxonomy, while relying heavily on geographic distribution. This was used to better understand the biodiversity of mouse lemurs on the island and where conservation efforts should be prioritized. The new praying mantis species was identified from specimens collected at Mali Po in southern Yunnan province, and it was studied against other related species using morphology and DNA analysis, while also considering geography. They are similar to the related mantis Phyllothelis werneri. The species name Qingjinam comes from an ancient green robe called Qingjin. This refers to the species having a distinctive green color on the rear edge of the pronotum, a plate-like covering on the mantis's thorax. The study authors suggest that this new species points to a lack of knowledge of mantis diversity in Yunnan and Southeast Asia. The human-caused mass extinction of birds has dire implications, according to a new study. A new study published on Thursday in Science documents the extinction of 610 bird species during the period of human expansion in the last 130,000 years. The study also finds that this mass extinction has caused the loss of functional diversity, that is, the number of functions that birds play within their ecologies. According to lead author Tom Matthews at the Birmingham Institute of Forest Research in the UK, this means that important ecological roles performed by these birds, such as spreading seeds and eating insects, are no longer being filled, leading to other environmental impacts, Reuters reported. Most extinctions of birds are found to have happened on islands, disproportionately affecting island ecologies. As examples, Matthews pointed to the extinction of the dodo on the island of Mauritius and the extinction of the Kauai-o'o, which was declared extinct last year. Both species were frugivorous, meaning that they ate fruit. Frugivorous birds help spread the seeds of plants, so their extinctions can also contribute to the extinction of native plants. Matthews also said that factors leading to bird extinctions include human hunting of birds, the introduction of rats and cats, and the spread of diseases introduced by humans. In studying the phylogenetic impact of this mass extinction, the study also finds a loss of about 3 billion years of unique evolutionary history. In addition, the authors project the additional loss of 1,000 bird species over the next 2 centuries. From the paper abstract, quote, These results highlight the severe consequences of the ongoing biodiversity crisis and the urgent need to identify the ecological functions being lost through extinction. Unquote. According to a companion paper by Melissa Kemp from the Department of Integrative Biology at the University of Texas, Austin, the results of this new study highlight a need to identify the ecological functions of birds before they go extinct, as well as the need for greater conservation efforts on islands and in other ecosystems. Multiple major solar flares last week sent coronal mass ejections earthward. Last week, a sunspot designated region 3842 emitted two of the three strongest solar flares during solar cycle 25, the current approximately 11-year solar cycle of the sun's electromagnetic activity. This included an X7.1 solar flare on Tuesday and an X9 solar flare on Thursday, which is so far the strongest solar flare of this cycle. The X7.1 flare is the third strongest flare, only after an X8.7 flare that happened on May 14th and led to powerful auroras on Earth that were as visible as far south as Florida. The two X-class flares last week resulted in powerful radio blackouts over the Pacific as well as over the Atlantic, and both also produced coronal mass ejections directed towards Earth. Additional solar storms were produced by other smaller sunspots, including region 3841 and region 3843. However, as multiple storms have started colliding with Earth last night, there has not been very much aurora activity like there was in May, and as was forecast by NASA and NOAA. According to spaceweather.com, quote, CMEs have structure, and Earth might have threaded a hole in this CME's inhomogeneous shock front. If so, strong geomagnetic storms are unlikely this weekend, unquote. However, NOAA Space Weather Center still forecasts strong solar weather for tonight, with potential for aurora viewing over Oregon and the Midwest. According to spaceweather.com, aurora activity can also be enhanced during this period near the equinox because of the Russell-McFerrin effect, an effect caused by the Earth's electromagnetic field aligning with the magnetic field of solar winds. And now for Mr. Jeff Knox.
Hello. So, yes, today, again, kind of like last time, I'm going to diverge a little bit from only talking about UFO stuff because I happen to find this stuff really interesting, and I'll talk about early computers and stuff if I want to. So, if you don't like it, deal with it. Today, we're going to be talking about Wilhelm Schickard, polymath, inventor of the first calculated machine, and UFO witness. William Schickard, whose name sometimes will appear as Schickard, Schickhart, Schickardi, like if it's in Latin, sometimes Wilhelmus Schickardi. But William Schickard was born to a Lutheran pastor's daughter and a carpenter in Herrenberg, Germany. He excelled mathematically and academically, earning degrees in theology and Oriental languages from the University of Tübingen, where he studied mathematics and astronomy under Michael Maslin. And pay attention to this picture. So this picture at the bottom is drawn by the Neckar River in Tübingen and is painted by Johannes Pfister in 1620. Johannes Pfister will come up later on. Because he was not only an illustrator and a printmaker, he was a mechanician that would be involved with helping construct some of these machines. He also illustrated that drawing to the right in kind of black and white of Tübingen. And after becoming a Lutheran minister, he collaborated with Johannes Kepler on engravings and calculations for Kepler's Harmony of the Worlds. And here we can see some of the engravings and illustrations he did for Kepler's Harmony of the Worlds. In fact, Kepler would actually kind of be good friends with Schickard. Kepler came back to Tübingen when his mother was accused of witchcraft, and Schickard was the Lutheran pastor at the time in Tübingen, and they kind of they became friends at that point when Kepler kind of came to town to help in his mother's defense against witchcraft, which was eventually later on dropped. In 1619, Schickard transitioned to academia as a professor of Hebrew at Tübingen, and he created innovative teaching methods and tools such as the Hebrew rota for Hebrew verb conjugation. What this basically was a similar kind of to almost like his calculating machine. It was a rotating cylinder that you could rotate in certain directions to conjugate various Hebrew verbs. And so he created mechanical devices even before this calculating machine to help teach people Hebrew. And he wrote books on this topic, on Hebrew, teaching Hebrew and other Oriental languages. But Schickard also had a deep interest in astronomy. And in 1623, he invented something called the astroscopium. The astroscopium is kind of, it's kind of like in between like a planisphere and like a two-dimensional star kind of like chart. It's a paper cone featuring the imagery of the starry sky. And these paper cones would be printed on paper, like in this book of his, and you would cut them out and fold them so they were taped together in a cone-like shape, like you can see here. And there was another kind of cone at the bottom, and with this, you could basically rotate it depending on time to see which view of like the night sky would be at any given time, you know. And you can actually make these yourself. There's this Kelly Magruder who has a PDF on making your own astroscopium, and I think that would be another kind of fun project that people could do, is to build one of these kind of paper cones of the night starry sky. And his work Ephemeris Lunaris, he developed a theory for the moon's orbit that allowed him to calculate the most precise ephemerides of the time, providing position values for moving astronomical objects. He was also the first to determine meteor trajectories using simultaneous observations from different locations. So he was really involved in geodesy and geodesic calculations and triangulations. I don't believe the triangulation theory was actually his own, but he apparently was the first to calculate these trajectories. And in fact, he was witness himself to a meteor event on November 7th, 1623, that he was able to take multiple observations and calculate its height and path, which he illustrates in this kind of woodcut here. Schickard was also a talented mechanic who designed many of his own instruments, leading Johannes Kepler to refer to him as the ambidextrous philosopher. In a letter in 1623, he created the very first calculating machine, which he termed the Rechenor, or a calculating clock. This machine was capable of adding and subtracting numbers up to 6 digits. For more complex calculations like division, he used what was called Napier calculating rods, or Napier bones, which formed the cylinders that contained the multiplication tables. So these Napier bones were basically a way of doing calculation, lattice calculation using logarithmic tables. And so what they did is they took these bones, which were typically just kind of sticks like that with these tables, put it on like a sheet of paper kind of like this, and rolled it around a cylinder so they could be rotated. And in fact, this kind of technique would later be used. This is a device from the later 18th century of Napier bones on rotating cylinders that, much like Schickard's calculating machine, you would rotate these cylinders around to determine what the right multiplication values were in these tables. Only, unlike Schickard's machine, there's no mechanical apparatus here to do the additional additions or subtractions or calculations. It would have been done on paper. But it was a similar kind of principle. And these are two drawings actually from Schickard's time, of his machine. And you can tell they do look, kind of computing like, almost more like a cash register, but they do look like some sort of kind of mechanical calculating apparatus. This sketch on the right is one that's actually included in the letter to Johannes Kepler. The sketch on the left was actually found with some instructions to the mechanician that would be basically fabricating this machine on behalf of Schickard. And in 1718, so the first kind of references to this machine were published back in 1718 at the very least. One of the first biographers of Kepler published a collection of his letters that included 2 letters from Schickard to Kepler. And on one of these letters is this note by the publisher referencing Schickard's calculator machine. And in the index of this list of correspondence, they have it also listed as Machina Arithmetica on page 863. And so in this first letter, we can see that was sent to Schickard to Kepler on September 20th, 1623, detailing the results of his work in Latin. He says, "What you have achieved through calculation," Schickard stated, "I have just tried to do by way of mechanics. I have constructed a machine consisting of 11 complete and 6 incomplete, actually mutilated sprocket wheels, which can calculate. You would burst out laughing if you were present to see how it carries itself from one column of tens to the next column, or borrows from them during its subtraction." And you can see the publisher put a side notation here, the Schickard machine Arithmetica. So there is, at least in 1718, a copy of these letters mentioning his publishing his calculating machine, or calculating clock, as it was called. In his next letter, dated February 25th, 1624, Schickard would deliver some unfortunate news to Kepler. And this was published and a further kind of complete Gesamtwerk, volume 18, that contained the basically correspondence from 1620 through 1630. And they published this second letter of his, which provides a little bit more detail of how the machine works and explains this unfortunate news that happened. That's the full letter. Then you can see this, that one illustration of the machine came from the second letter in 1624. And he also included a kind of a sketch of the gear mechanisms. He starts off with kind of the bad news here. And remember this guy I just briefly mentioned that did those illustrations, Johannes Pfister. "I have placed an order with the local man, Johann Pfister, for the construction of a machine for you. But when half finished, this machine, together with some other things of mine, especially several metal plates, fell victim to a fire which broke out unseen during the night. I take the loss very hard, now especially since there is no time now to produce a replacement soon." He then goes on to further describe the operations of this machine and how it works. "I will describe the computer more precisely some other time. Now I don't have enough time. A are the upper faces of vertical cylinders. So at the very top, it's hard to see, but those knobs at the very top of the machine say A, and that would be the rotation of those Napier calculation tables that are printed on the cylinders, whose side surfaces are inscribed with the multiplication tables. The digits of these tables can be hooked out of the windows B of a sliding plate. And so you would move these like wooden plates to be able to see what the numbers were of those various cylinders. From the inner side of the machine to the disc DD are attached wheels with 10 cogs, and each wheel is clutched with a similar wheel in a manner that provided some of the right wheel spins around 10 revolutions, the left wheel will make 1 revolution. But provide the first wheel spins around 100 revolutions, the third wheel to the left will make 1 revolution. In order for the revolutions of the wheels to be in the same direction, intermediate wheels are necessary." And again, that's a bit closer up image. It's kind of the gear kind of little sprocket sketch that he did here. And this again is that sketch of the that they found in Stuttgart, along with the instructions that were sent to Johannes Pfister on how to basically construct and manufacture the machine. Now, the machine was pretty essentially a basic, simple machine. In fact, the only mechanical aspect of it was this subtractor adder unit that used these cog wheels. The entire upper part of the machine with the rotating cylinders is really just for reference point, is so you know what to do with the adder wheels at the bottom here. And this machine was constructed using these various cogs and what's called a single tooth wheel there. And this was actually a problem, and it's kind of why this machine is limited to only 6 digits, is because the amount of force necessary to carry across all those wheels on a very large number would probably break that single sprocket. And so this was kind of done away with when Blaise Pascal would invent his calculating machine 20 or so years later. They didn't use single tooth wheels because they realized the problems of the forces that would be required to propagate a carry over all the gears with large numbers would be too much, and it could, break the mechanisms. But you can basically see how it would work. As each of these wheels would spin every 10 times, it would cause that really long sprocket to kick over and carry over in the next digit. And there's an excellent YouTube channel you might check out, JEPU Machines, the guy that built one of these, and he demonstrates the use and stuff. And these that kind of illustration of the gears up there is from one of his videos. And this is another thing with his videos where you can see the back of one of these machines. This is the back where they have these Napier bones on cylinders that just spin around. And you can see those bars that you pull out to the right or the left and the front to be able to see these various columns. And I'm going to try and do a simulation here just to kind of give you an idea of how this thing works here. Let me see here. All right. So this is a simulation, a simulator that was created in Scratch, and you can visit that link yourself and give it a try out. It's pretty easy to use, at least for basic operations. It uses an architecture known as abridged multiplication, which was kind of obscure for the time. It was some people aware of it. Kepler was aware of it, as well as a couple other contemporaries of Shicard's. But most people were just, quite frankly, not aware of how bridge multiplication worked at the time. And so that's the way this machine works. I'm just going to demonstrate a couple real quick operations. So addition is pretty easy. And remember that the mechanics of the machine is mostly the adder and subtractor mechanism. So let's just say I wanted to do basic addition of like 27. So put 7, I would turn this knob to 7, turn this knob in 2 places to 27, and I wanted to add 56 to it. So again, then I would just turn this knob again, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this knob 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that would be my addition, 83. And you can do the same for subtraction. In the real machine, you would just turn the knob the opposite direction. In this machine, in this simulator, you have to hold down the left arrow, which is kind of counterintuitive, and you can subtract numbers as well. But that's pretty easy to do. So what if we want to do some multiplication? Say I want to multiply the number 332 by 5. What I'd first do is I would turn these cylinders up here to the proper number. So 300, so 3 in the 300s place, 332, 332. So I've entered the number into up here, so these tables are in the right position. I want to multiply it by 5, so I click 5 over here to get the right numbers that I need to deal with here. Now, this is basically just telling me, now, if you were looking at the Napier bones, these are typically done in a ratio of the 10th, like the carry place, and then the sub number. They just add them in the simulator here. So this tells me what I need to add in this column. So 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You can see how that moved to 0, and it automatically carried the 1 over there. Now, you can save time, and since I knew that was 10, I could have just left this at 0 and carried the 1 over here. That's what I'm going to do for the next two. So then I'd move over to the next column. 15, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 1 carries, 1. Then I move to the next column. 15 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 carries. 332 by 5 is 1,660. So this machine works by converting addition and multiplication operations to subtraction and addition operations that it then performs with your adder and register down there. Let's say I wanted to calculate 332 by 35 instead of 5. So first, I'm already halfway there. I've already got 5. and it's sitting here in my register. Next is 30. So the 3, so we're moving over one decimal place. I click 3. But because we're in the 30 place, these numbers get shifted over basically 1. So in this place here, I'm adding 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9. In this place here, I'm at 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And next place also 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 332 by 35 is 11,620. Now you can go all the way out. I've actually calculated 6 decimals by 6 decimals. So point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 by 0.987564 or whatever. And you can do that again by just kind of keeping track of that decimal place. Since there's no decimal on here, you perform it as basically as if it wasn't a decimal, and you keep track of the decimal, and you kind of would add it back in later. Another kind of nifty feature that they had on this is that because you only had 6 digits you could work with in the register, if you tried to move this last digit over to 9 and then one more, as if it would carry over, because there's no register, what this machine would do is it would beep, and we can see here, and that beep would remind the operator to put a ring on his finger, and that ring would add as kind of a reminder that he has one extra carry place that he needs to add back in when the calculation is done. And that's how they could work on numbers larger than 6 digits. Now, these buttons on the bottom are really, they're just helpful memory registers. Like, so when you're doing larger calculations, like by multiple digits, it can help to store like what you've already done down here in the bottom, so you remember kind of what you've done. So it's a pretty simple machine. It's really just a basic adder machine that adds and subtracts, and uses an innovative method of abridged multiplication with these Napier bones on cylinders to tell you what you need to add and subtract to perform these calculations. I think it's very cool. It's kind of fun to go play around and figure out how to use and figure out its operations. I would actually like to create my own Schickard machine eventually. I'd even like to make kits of these that kids can make, that could be sold for like STEM kits to be sold in schools to teach people early computing. Because we just did some calculations on a machine that is now 400 years old, over 400 years old. So I think that's very interesting, very cool. Now, in 1631, Schickard succeeded his mentor, Michael Maslin, as the astronomy professor at Tübingen. And he was a staunch supporter of the heliocentric model, and he maintained collegial and friendly relations with Johannes Kepler. That year, he also invented what was the first handheld planetarium to illustrate the movements of the solar system. And you can actually see that in his portrait from 1631. You can see him holding it. And on the left here, we have what was a recreation. That's I don't remember what museum that's in, but there's a recreation of his handheld planetarium that we see him holding in his portrait here. Now, unfortunately, the 30 Years' War that ran from 1618 to 1648 had a profound impact on the later years of Schickard's life. After the Battle of Nördlingen in September 1634, where the Catholic army, bolstered by Spanish troops, achieved a decisive victory over the Protestants, the victorious forces occupied the town of Tübingen. With them, they brought the bubonic plague, which severely affected the town's populations. Within the following year, Schickard would lose his wife, his children, his entire family to the bubonic plague, and would become the last surviving member of his family to also die of the plague, dying on or possibly just before October 24th, 1635. Now, with his death, now we know that Schickard tried to have one of his calculating machines created for Kepler, and that was destroyed in a fire. There essentially was a machine of his own that he had created. We do not know what happened to it. Unfortunately, it's probably likely it got destroyed or burned after he died from the plague. They likely would have burned his property and other things, and it probably just didn't survive. So we'll likely never see an original copy of one of these machines. And though his contributions were not really acknowledged in his lifetime, like I said, Blaise Pascal, who many people think of, and for the longest time thought invented the calculating kind of machine, wouldn't invent it for 20 years. But to be fair to Pascal, he would not have been aware of Schickard's machine. In fact, it's doubtful most people were aware of Schickard's machine until it was kind of rediscovered, in the last century. So his contributions may have not been acknowledged at the time, but they are acknowledged now, and he is commemorated with the Wilhelm Schickard Institute for Informatik at the University of Tübingen, which is basically the German way of saying the computer science department, and the Wilhelm Schickard Schule in Tübingen is also named after him. Now, after years of experience in these astronomical observations and calculations, William Schickard witnessed a remarkable celestial event on January 25th, 1630. This event could be likened to a classic UFO sighting today. However, as the hours passed, the observation grew increasingly strange, evolving into what has been referred to as a miracle sign or miraculous sign or air battle, raising skepticism among some of his academic peers at the time. Despite this, Schickard, as a direct observer of the event, was committed to documenting this phenomenon as accurately and as scientifically as possible. In his 33-page manuscript, I'm not going to read the German here, but it basically says, description of the miracle sign seen in the evening of 7 o'clock on the evening to the 10th in the morning in the clear sky towards the north. And this was printed just 2 days later on January 27th, 1630. And as he kind of details the event. I think that's pretty remarkable. It was printed 2 days later. To be honest, I'm not sure how he wrote it and they typeset it. Maybe they just mean he turned it in for print 2 days later, and so that's the date they put on it, or he wrote it 2 days later. I don't see how they could have had this actually printed within 2 days. But that's kind of besides the point. Schickard details the event in this document. And I'm going to kind of stick to mostly his words because I think for this and the other case, because I think it's important to hear it as they say it. Take into consideration here, when translating 400-year-old German manuscripts, it can be kind of difficulty, and the translations can be kind of a little iffy because they don't use some of the same words that modern German uses. Their sentence structure can be odd and kind of weird. The way just the books are printed and formatted without any real sentence structure is kind of weird. So I've translated these as best I could with some help from some German speakers, but there might still be a little kind of iffy or weird sounding translation here. And this is the problem when dealing with a lot of these old cases, is that there's could be stuff we're just missing in translation that we just are not understanding correctly. But so this is what he says. As I, in accordance with my habit, contemplated the stars in the then clear sky, and after a long southern observation, finally turned my gaze to the northern sky, an unexpected phenomenon presented itself, a snow-white material, which I cannot well call a cloud because it was not so fleecy or fringed at the edges as natural clouds usually are. Instead, it was quite smooth and polished, perhaps somewhat brightened by reflection. It also cannot easily be called vapor, because it had a specific, constant, and elegant oval shape, whereas vapors otherwise flutter around in an unstable form. Not to mention, it far surpassed the ordinary clouds in brightness and radiance, being completely pure and homogeneous in nature. After he makes a few more astronomical observations, he returns to the description of the object. In this first apparition, I am astonished by the unusual brightness and arouses in me the suspicion of a vende, which I looked up, basically Latin at the time, is to see a meteor. The resident concern of the new papers. Now, this is one of the things that had problems with translation because it says like Neuen Zeitungen, which I guess refers to when they say new papers, printed papers as opposed to handwritten papers. So the newly kind of printed papers. Whoever doesn't understand anything about the sky, to him it may well appear at first as a common cloud. But I looked at how the sun was hovering in Aquarius at that time, around 7. But I looked at how low the sun was already below the horizon. and how much lower the moon after its last quarter was still below Scorpio, that it was thus naturally white, that the two celestial lights were then quite impossible for a cloud in the same position to light up just a little, become so bright that it would give off such a clear glow. And even if some peripatetic of Aristotle wanted to say whether perhaps the vapor has risen higher above the usual barriers of the air, that the sun's rays might have drawn it up next to the earth, then the day that passed, again the season's custom was warm and finally bright, as is the best spring. Yet soon afterwards, at the oval figure before, in the right side toward the right hand towards the Lyra, a black dark color has shown, which sides indeed without doubt turned closer towards the sun and moon, and therefore must shine much brighter than the others when they receive the light from there. So it follows once again that this appearance was not natural at all, but the true root and origin of the miracle. And that's sounds a little weird. Like I said, there's not like full sentence structures. They break things up into these like brackets, and it's just kind of comes off kind of weird, but you kind of get the general idea there. And being a man of science, Schickard was not quick to write this off just as a miracle. He hoped to kind of find some sort of scientific explanation for what he was witnessing, and he states, however, I must, in order to more thoroughly dispel all doubts, honestly confess my own initial suspicion, because in this case I am neither gullible nor willing to allow miracles, since all human wisdom would then be lost to the matter, could no longer be explained by natural reason. I looked in all the heavens to see if I could find any remedy, but found nothing other than the bright star Venus, which stood about 60 degrees, according to the eye, to the left, and shone very beautifully. As the often bright part was inclined almost exactly towards the same planetary star, while the dark part was actually facing away from it, I considered the former to be light transmitted to it, and the latter to be its shadow, as the ancient astronomer Tycho Brahe also testified that the comet Schweif in the year 1577 was not directed towards the sun like others, but towards Venus. And I also remembered from my own limited experience that Venus can illuminate a dark body from afar, as I often did, and most recently on Epiphany Day, the 6th, in the evening, when the young crescent moon was still more than 10 degrees from it, and yet evidently illuminated by it on its dark side. He then goes to report on the phenomenon after 7 o'clock, and this is where it gets kind of really interesting, and the multiple objects come into play here. This bright shining mass did not remain alone for long, but soon acquired two skins, one from the left, somewhat lower than the rhombus star of the dolphin, which looks not unlike a dolphin, and it had the shape of an overturned cauldron, or in summer a haystack on the meadow. The other, on the right, however, towards the foot of Allegeti or Hercules, which this image stretches out from the ground as if to trample the head of its trachea, this one has the shape of a long waystone, which has been ground down in both places. The kind reader will forgive me for using such silly similes. I cannot figure it any other way unless I have time to paint it with lines. These two, or rather all three colors, were snow white, but not just a bad white, like chalk or milk, which give no shine, but rather brilliant and shimmering, so that the area here was illuminated. The light was not luminous, like the reflection of a lying mirror or still water, but rather it swayed and agitated, and it did not sway as quickly as the fixed stars, but rather gently and roughly, like the waves of flowing water. Afterwards it grew, rose slightly, and then disappeared unexpectedly, but soon came back and repeated this change several times, so that one did not know whether it had really disappeared or it was only hidden. And this is how it had appeared up to that point towards the northwest. So, in summary, Schickard describes a bright oval or egg-shaped object in the northern sky, distinctly different than known clouds due to its smooth and polished appearance. After further observations, he noticed the emergence of two additional white objects besides its oval shape, each displaying different shades of colors of white. One resembled an overturned kettle or a haystack in a summer meadow, and this is one of the weird words, Überschock, that they kind of used, that shock refers to like a haystack. We can never figure out what the first part of the word was supposed to mean. Maybe like lard, Oberschuck, whatever it was. But so essentially like a haystack. And you can see this does kind of look like a haystack on a meadow down there might look like. And the other object looked like a long sharpening stone or a waystone with both sides already worn down and so he used familiar objects of his time for the reference. And I like that Rachel made those little illustrations for me. So thank you, Rachel. So these objects shimmered in a way different from the hurried twinkling of fixed stars, prompting Schickard to wonder if they had truly vanished or merely hidden from view. So while this summary captures only a fraction of Schickard's observations, his manuscript spans 33 densely printed pages. The quality of his count is enhanced by his extensive background in astronomy and natural observations, highlighting his reputation as one of the foremost polymaths of his time. Like I said, he was the first guy to calculate your triangulation to calculate the paths of meteors as they came in. He created some of the most accurate survey maps and kind of sort of revolutionized like precision surveying kind of at the time, using his various geodesic calculations of the time. But ultimately, watchers must decide whether to accept Schickard's distinctions from known natural phenomenon like clouds and his interpretations of an otherworldly miraculous sign. In the context of modern UFO sightings, notable parallels emerge, particularly with frequent reports of egg-shaped or oval-shaped UFOs in contemporary literature. Like we had seen in my previous presentation on the Mikhail Valençol case here on the right, which shares a lot of similarities with the Socorro case. Oval or egg-shaped UFOs have been part of the literature for many years. Now, Schickard, who had previously suffered controversy in his life over his heterodox religious beliefs, would receive public pushback over publishing this publication on his miracle signs. In a contribution to the collection of writings in the Tübingen Schickard Symposium on the 400th anniversary of his birthday, religious scholar Ulrich Bubenheimer, in his paper Wilhelm Schickard in the context of the religious subculture, explains the debates with a Tübingen theology professor, Lucas Osiander the Younger. In 1630, Osiander threatened to censor a work of Schickard that was in print, in which the latter had described two celestial phenomena and interpreted them as miraculous signs. Schickard saved the print with temporary feigned humility towards Osiander, as he wrote to his brother. Osiander was offended by Schickard's attempt to interpret the celestial phenomena prognostically. Osiander had already spoken out against the many prophecies and chiliastic apocalyptic interpretations of the time in a 1621 work. Furthermore, Schickard's view, which was also current in the Tübingen circles of the time, that God sometimes speaks to his followers in dreams, must have smelled of spiritualism to the Tübingen orthodoxy, especially since Schickard took up the idea in this context that prophetic interpretations require higher inspiration, often only given to simple idiots. Osiander may have also suspected Schickard of adhering to esoteric future predictions in the manner of the Kabbalah Arithmetica, which he, Osiander, had polemicized in 1621. This suspicion could have been fueled by Schickard's repeatedly expressed interest in Kabbalistic numerical speculation. In 1621, Osiander placed the Kabbalah Arithmetica alongside the Rosicrucian Utopia. This accusation that Schickard was associated with Rosicrucian circles in Tübingen had already been made against him a few years earlier. Now, part of the reasons why people had kind of tied him to Rosicrucian circles is, in fact, because he was tied to Rosicrucian circles. Schickard's close contacts with this guy Christopher Besoldis were cited as his heterodox tendencies at the time. Christopher Besoldis was a juror, a lawyer at the time in Tübingen, who was also close friends with Johannes Kepler. In fact, he was a juror on Kepler's mother's case of witchcraft that had later been dropped. Besoldis is also perhaps more famous, I would guess, would be for his involvement with the Rosicrucian Manifesto. In fact, the Rosicrucian philosophies and manifestos were considered to be based on Christopher Besoldis' work, Tobias Hess, and this guy Johannes Valentinus Andrea. In fact, they together with mostly Andreas are considered to be the authors of the Chemical Writing of Christian Rosenkreuz. So, in fact, Schickard was hanging out with all the creators of the Rosicrucian kind of philosophies, and is considered one of the this guy Christopher Besoldis back here is considered one of the kind of founding peoples of Rosicrucian philosophy and beliefs. He's also kind of well known for what he considers the justification of the natural law. To him, natural law was that human beings, we have free consciousness and we have the natural right to believe whatever we want to believe. Nobody can force us to believe anything. And the most natural law of all humans is that we have the innate ability to choose what we want to believe. So that's kind of another thing that this Christopher Basoldis guy was used to. So you can see with his connections at the time that he would have been kind of on the outs with the Orthodox religious people. In fact, like Tobias Hess with this other guy, Simon Stedian, kind of wanted to abolish the papacy in 1609. And so these guys were kind of had a lot of controversial beliefs, and Schickard and the rest of them were kind of all close buddies hanging out together. Now, this is not the first air battle or miraculous sign to actually be seen in Tübingen. Earlier in December 5th, 1577, near Tübingen, Germany, a remarkable phenomenon resembling large, high, broad hats emerged from the clouds surrounding the rising sun, blanketing the ground below. This event is dramatically illustrated in this broadsheet that was published the following year in 1578. And we can see this, I think it's a beautiful illustration here of these raining hats kind of falling on the ground. And this is the rest of the broadsheet kind of. Now, the broadsheet, surprisingly, is really mostly just like a religious polemic, like that doesn't actually talk about the sighting all that much, like only briefly. It's mostly full of other superfluous stuff. So while the image of an army marching through the clouds is a common element in many celestial visions of this period, the more intriguing elements of this image are the ghostly double sun that seems to peek through the clouds and shower of hats following to the earth. Pierre Basteau, in his History of Prodigies, so History of Prodigies, second edition in 1594, also describes this event in a bit more detail here. And this is an illustration that was also that was included in this History of Prodigies. Now, this second edition, Pierre, and again, I apologize for butchering pronunciation names here, Pierre Basteau, was already dead at this point. They've actually took his first edition of the book, and several other people added stuff onto it. But it was printed in this 1594 edition of this book here. And I'm just going to, again, bear with the translations. The translations I mostly got on this one from another document I'll mention here in a second. But I think it's best to just kind of read what they have to say about the case. In the city of Althoff and its surroundings, in the land of Württemberg in Germany, 1 league from the town of Tübingen, it was seen on December 5th in the year 1577 at around 7 a.m. that the rising sun appeared not in its natural clarity and splendor, but instead wholly yellowish, as it at times does with the full moon, and resembled a large round barrel, shining so little that it did not dazzle, but could be contemplated freely. Shortly afterwards, its surroundings grew quite dark, as if eclipsed, and the sun was red as blood, so that we could not tell if it truly was the sun. Just then we saw 2 suns, one red, one yellow, which clashed together, and one seemed to replace the other, as can be seen during an eclipse. This lasted some time, until the other sun vanished, at which point we could only see the first dim yellow one. Shortly afterwards, there appeared a small black cloud shaped like a ball or a large plate, which dashed straight towards the sun and covered its center so that we could no longer see more than a great yellow circle. While the center of the sun was thus covered, another small, long, blackish cloud appeared. It fought with the sun, and they covered with each other several times until the sun eventually recovered its aforementioned yellowish color. Now, at this time, a black cloud appeared from the west towards the sun, and from it emerged a large number of people dressed in black, armed like soldiers, both on foot and horseback, marching in formation. This procession prepared to move across the sun and drift away from the east, accompanied by additional clouds, some red and others yellow like saffron, that seemed to rise from the sun's gloom and encircle it. And in this illustration, we can see all these soldiers on horseback and walking dressed in black. Next, out of these clouds came reverberations reverberations resembling tall, wide hats. And all of the ground appeared to be yellow and bloody and seemed to be covered by tall and wide hats. Those hats were of diverse colors, red, blue, green, and most of them black. Afterwards, these clouds descended like fog, and it seemed to rain blood, not only in the sky, but all over the ground and on the men's clothes, and everything we saw seemed bloody and yellowish. So, what were the residents of Tübingen in 1577 witnessing in the skies above town? Researchers Martin Schau and Chris Auerbach address this case in their Invasions of the Solar Bubbles catalog. And I'd like to thank Chris Auerbach for sending me a copy of this catalog this week so I could check this. And most of the work on this 1577 case and the sources I got basically turned on to from looking at his work. And I kind of tend to agree with their analysis here because it kind of fits in with many of these other kind of earlier cases and broadsheets, such as the Nuremberg event. The depiction of the army marching in the clouds may well be a satirical commentary on the contemporary conflicts of the time, possibly referencing the battles of Wenden or concerns over the Treaty of Bergerac. The blood-red light illuminating the observers and the shower of the hats following the procession could symbolize the casualties of war. Bostow's account concludes with the moral urging people to amend their life, suggesting a deeper significance to this event. Notably, the date in question, the sun was still below the horizon at 7 a.m. local time in Tübingen when this event was supposed to take place, which raises some questions as to the authenticity of the account. However, minor discrepancy in timing may not be significant. As you know, it's hard to get accurate times and witnesses on a sighting that happened 2 days ago, let alone one that happened 400 something years ago. Whether they saw it actually an hour earlier or not, or somewhere in the time calculations were not taking something into consideration, it's possible that there could just be minor discrepancy in the timing. But if it was in fact at that time, the sun was still below the horizon and would not have actually been visible, which could indicate that this was basically just kind of like a metaphor that was being published and was not an actual event. Celestial phenomenon in the 16th century were often interpreted as omens, and the motif of an army in the clouds was common for the era's visions. And if, in fact, if you recall the famous Nuremberg broadsheet event, which many people put up as a very early UFO sighting, in my opinion and many others, in fact, it's not even an event that actually happened. It's not real. It was just something printed in a paper to basically tell a metaphor to express some of the contemporary concerns and worries of the time. That it was not actually real. And this could be, in fact, be what's happening on this broadsheet as well, is that it was not an actual real event. It was really just meant for religious purposes, essentially. But if it was a real event, what could have they been seeing? So the hats mentioned could reference size, as seen in historical UFO cases. Bostow's vivid description might evoke images of flying saucers with their kind of raised crowns and wide brims. The nature of these hat-like phenomenon raises questions as to whether they were actually physical objects, or did the description stem from a misinterpretation kind of during the translation of the text. It's possible that they refer to lenticular clouds, which can be shaped like hats, like we can see in some of these illustrations, and they can create unusual sights under certain conditions. The colors described might indicate iridescence of, or like a Mattis cloud formation, often associated with thunderstorms. And the term reverberations, which again is a term that perhaps doesn't make much sense. Perhaps it's a bad translation, but it could also suggest sounds reminiscent of thunder, which are also frequently noted in various contexts where you see clouds in situations like this. So, and Jack Valet briefly mentions this case with Chris Auerbach in their book Wonders in the Sky, which again lists the sources that I used here. So with both of these cases, again, we are left with essentially 400-year-old written manuscripts that we just have to trust that the person saw what they said they saw and were reliable witnesses. There really isn't a whole lot more you can do with it It's up to, I guess, the watcher to decide whether or not they could, trust the observations by these people, or whether there was prosaic explanations. I think in the case of Shikard, he did actually see something. Whether you can trust his observations, that they weren't just clouds, that's up to you to decide. I think in this later case, I think it's likely there was not even a real event. And if you look at that original broadsheet, it is mostly religious. Like it seems to mostly be just using that event for other purposes, which was common at the time. And I think that's what's also happened with like the Nuremberg broadsheet and potentially even other broadsheets from the time period. And that's that.
This is the Scientific American article that Vicente Juan Ballester Olmos and I made for Scientific American recently. It's just a 4-minute opinion piece, but it talks about the ORSAP ATIP program that ran from 2008 to at least 2010, although probably in a much more decrepit state after 2010. And money had long run out by then. So, it's generated a lot of confusion over the years in ufology, and people have been debating like what exactly was ATIP? Was it separate from ORSAP? Was it the same thing? And we think that it was just and many other people have made this point as well, that it was just a nickname for ORSAP, the official program, but the name ATIP was later co-opted by Lou Elizondo, and he's sort of used the name as a way to draw sucker from the official program, which he's further confused the UFO scene by talking about how alternately he had nothing to do with it, and then saying that he was the leader of it or that he was involved in it. So his involvements in this have been very confusing, I think deliberately. But ORSAP was significant, the official program, which is actually talked about in a couple of books by Lakatsky, Colm Kelleher, and George Knapp. And the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program is what it stood for. It was officially meant to be like a program for projecting future weapons developments and the threats that America would face. But that's how it was sold to DIA, under whose auspices it was conducted. But actually, it was a de facto UFO paranormal program, and it had some overlaps with Skinwalker Ranch. Robert Bigelow was, promoting it behind the scenes, and he had some political connections as well. Harry Reid was involved as well. And so it was basically a UFO paranormal program, which is significant because the US government had gone on a sort of hiatus after Blue Book ended in 1969. In terms of, at least like kind of large scale exertions in the UFO topic, they did have like some piecemeal studies here and there. The Air Force, I think, as well did some, collecting data for like individual cases near air bases and things of that sort, but there wasn't a sort of cohesive program as such dealing with UFOs until ORSAP. But even then, it was like a, sort of sneaky, because it was done under the table and it wasn't what was advertised to the government. And so we talk about that also in a 74-page document, which we link to in this one. And what else is in there? So we say that the real value of the Arrow organization now, the All Anomaly, what does it stand for? I can always forget. All Anomaly Resolution Office. Yeah. So that is sort of the official UFO office of the government now. And we say that the real value of that organization is in, doing the old-fashioned investigations of UFOs, the UFO cases, I should say, because we're mostly dealing with reports. It's very rare that we get to study things in real time, but that perhaps stuff could be done in real time by using more advanced sensors and technology. So there's certainly openings there. But as for the whistleblower narrative that's sort of taken over in on Capitol Hill among some Congress people, that is just a dead end and a fool's errand, because it's just repeating the same age-old conspiracy stories that have been done for like decades, that the Air Force is covering up advanced technology that it's acquired from extraterrestrials or some otherworldly source. Those stories are, surely false, but they're still being pursued. Yeah, so the term non-human intelligence has also become a thing in ufology. So, it's sort of, you probably hear a lot of this, especially on Twitter, when people are debating. They talk about, well, I'm not saying it's aliens, right? But then you'll look at their Twitter feed and they say non-human intelligence. Well, what is that? It could be aliens, it could be interdimensionals, but it's some sort of, at least non-human intelligence. So these people are talking about something extraordinary and otherworldly. So, that's what they really want from this UFO stuff, is proof that we are being visited or interacted with by these beings. Now, there's also mention there of the CIA, the Robertson Panel's 1953 warning about potential Soviet exploitation of the genre. Now, that's relevant today because, there's pushes to get information disclosed, and some of that stuff could be really sensitive. And if it's prematurely disclosed, that could harm American national security. And there's a possibility that foreign intelligence, although there's no definitive proof of this, but foreign intelligence could conceivably see the UAP, seen as another avenue for trying to get America to disclose its military secrets. So that could have some potential harm. And we should look at the 1953 warning by the Robertson panel as a sort of precedent for that, looking at that danger. We do kind of talk about a positive note there within ufology, which is that a lot of historians are now looking at the mythical aspects and the sociological and cultural aspects. So that's certainly very useful to understand how myths and ideas spread, and why we believe what we do, why we see what we do, and also try to maybe link it to previous aerial sightings and waves and flaps from previous decades and previous centuries, actually, even millennia, because people have been seeing strange things in the skies for thousands of years, but it doesn't mean that it's aliens, but some people do try to make it that, obviously. So many serious people dismiss UFOs as a fringe topic. And yes, it sort of is, but it still has significance and importance. And it should be treated more seriously instead of just being conceded to the hucksters and the people who want to, drive extreme narratives or anti-scientific or at least non-scientific narratives. So we think that it is important for scientists and sociologists and psychologists to get ahead of this and try to, treat it more seriously instead of just dismissing it, because you could be missing out on a lot of really interesting things. So yeah, that's basically the gist there. Now, this has gotten a lot of flack on Twitter by many, believers and UAP advocates, because they think that we should have put this in or that in, like certain stories or developments, and we can't put everything in. Otherwise, we wouldn't be writing our own article here or opinion piece. It would be somebody else's, and we're trying to just give a broad contour of what we think are the main important elements going on right now. And people are free to disagree with that, but we can't just keep adding stuff and it would never get published, because then you'd have to be waiting forever, because there's always something new in this scene. Yeah, like the UAPDA, right? But we do deal with these things in the 74-page report, which is on academia.edu. We will be updating that very soon with the latest developments. So that's the place really to watch. But this is just a short opinion piece about what we think are the main elements which are important. And also, I should say that some people have linked to my web page or my website, ufologiescorrupt.com, and I've recently actually ameliorated my sort of mission statement on that website, because I think that the way that I phrase some things might have lent itself to confusion or misinterpretation. So, I was talking about that there's an extreme element or contingent within ufology which has got neo-fascist ideology or beliefs, and there's a lot of corruption as well in terms of money grubbing and selling fake stories, and that there's even been abuse and exploitation, including individual cases of child molestation. Okay, but those are, I should stress that those are very far and few between. It's not that I think that ufology is pushing people to do those things. It's more that there are those elements in there, and sometimes people do close ranks around the abuser, right, or the exploiter. So that's problematic, obviously, and that could speak to a broader problem. And ufology, of course, is not alone in this. In every paranormal scene, we see stuff like that, and even in like science as well, we do see sometimes people being abusive or exploitative, and then they get away with a lot, much more than they should ever have been allowed to for a long time. So I'm not saying that I'm not trying to paint everyone in this field as being obviously, child molesters or anything like that. I'm just saying that there is a contingent within it, and that there's often these very toxic power indifferences or dynamics at play, and that should be looked at more carefully. And people should be aware of it, right, going in, because there are people out there just to exploit or fleece believers and others in this scene. So yeah, like Wendell Stevens, Jan Hazen, who were convicted of. Well, Wendell Stevens was a close associate of Billy Meier, and the Figu sect. Billy Meier, the Swiss contactee. Wendell Stevens was the American, one of the American representatives of Figu. He was convicted of, I think, multiple counts of child molestation or molestation of underage girls. And Jan Hazen was recently also, he was, I think, an undercover detective, was posing as an underage girl, and they busted him for that. And there have been some other cases as well, Romanek and a couple of others, right? But again, I'm not saying that everyone in this field is like that. I'm just saying that there are such people in that, and that's sort of what I'm interested in a way, because I'm kind of interested in how corruption is sustained in institutions and in cultures. I just find it a kind of very fascinating segment to think about. And there's also other forms of corruption in ufology, such as I mentioned, like certain racist or fascist currents. There's also just people selling fake stories. Like I would classify the Bob Lazar story as a form of corruption, because he knows that it's not true. He's selling it as though it is true, and that's not right. And there's many, many, many stories in ufology like that, where people are just out to make money. Stephen Greer as well. And Steve Cambion talks about these people all the time on his show as well. And there's also harassment and doxing going on Twitter, especially. Apparently some associates of Elizondo have been doing this to his detractors. Okay. And Jeremy McGowan, he's got his own website, and he talks about his experiences with Elizondo. And I would also classify those sorts of things as a form of corruption, because there's a power dynamic and an imbalance where people can become exploitative or abusive, including like just emotionally I say just, but that's still pretty serious, right? Emotional abuse instead of physical abuse. And that also gets mixed in with like psychic narratives and stuff about consciousness. So there's a lot there to cover. But I think people might have gotten hung up on when I mentioned child molestation. They thought I was just, providing a broad brush accusation against everybody, which is not the case at all. So I did try to sort of reword some of that stuff on my website to make it clearer about what I meant.
I think your website was pretty clear. I think obviously you're not saying everyone in ufology is involved with pedophilia and cults and all that stuff. Like that should just be basic logic. You shouldn't have to read it. But anyway, to deny that this stuff exists in this field and has been a serious problem is just to deny history. Like you're not saying everyone involved is involved with all that, but it has been a real issue. Like, so.
And that was like unknown to the main person who was criticizing me. I forget what his name is.
Ford?
Do you know what I'm talking about? The podcaster or the radio guy?
At Ford?
Yeah. Like I was providing actual examples, and he was like, I don't know any of these people. He's like acting like this stuff doesn't happen, or that he's completely ignorant about it. And then he tells me, provide examples, and I provide them, and then he's saying that I don't know what I'm talking about.
He basically brags about his ignorance of the topic, as if that's like a good thing. Like, nah, dude, try and actually learn about this first before you want to criticize someone.
Yeah, I just try to kind of stay away from that stuff, and I'm more interested in UFOs. I'm not really interested in all of the corruption stuff, although it definitely is a thing for sure. I absolutely agree. But I try to stay away from that stuff as much as I can.
Yeah, it's probably smart as well, because there is a mental health toll. Actually.
Yeah.
The sad thing is these people never go away. They just keep coming back again, and it just like never dies. Like we haven't heard, like Wendell Stevens is gone and all that, but like some of these other guys, like Harzan was just convicted. But like one of these kind of pedophile guys, Richard Boylan, is back on Twitter making posts, on a daily basis or something almost. So like a lot of these guys are like, there's no consequences for like what they did. People welcome them right back into the community, like all over again, as if like nothing happened, because UFOs, and that's a problem. That's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really more interested in the UFO, like in Fortiana and High Strangeness, and also like really, I'm really interested in the scientific aspects of UFOs, like William Corliss, what he talks about, and this case that you were talking about today, Jeff, the Shikard case. I really like that stuff, and I wish that UFOs were, I don't know, I feel like there's value to UFOs, and it's completely lost in this, in all of this political stuff and people trying to exploit other people, and that's really terrible. Anyway, let's talk about this chapter. We're only going to cover one chapter again today, on Prospera Munoz. Take it away, Luis.
Oh, yeah. So this is a very famous case from Spain, and it's been doing the rounds for over 4 decades now. So Prospera Munoz was a, you could say contactee, but also abductee, because there were frightening aspects to her encounter, but there was also kind of some more pleasant or more benign aspects as well. So it's not always possible to just like neatly dichotomize contactee versus abductee, but I think she would have put herself more in the abductee category. So this is by Jose Ruesga Montiel, and I think he's a journalist, but he's been doing research on this case for many years, and he befriended Prospera, right, and became fairly close friends with her, maintained a correspondence, and that was kind of until she blocked him on Facebook, interestingly enough, more recently, and kind of came as a shock to him because he'd been always doing his due diligence about trying to protect her emotional integrity and just listening to her and, you know, assuming that she was telling the truth. And they did many things together, but, you know, for some reason she went off and was doing a lot of kind of promotional stuff with other researchers or advocates, and some of that was not good for her mental health. And but she kind of, you know, pushed him out of her life and is apparently still doing some of this stuff. So that's kind of interesting. So some strange events took place between 1946 or 47, and the protagonist starts to remember in 1980, and that attracts the attention of the Spanish ufological community. The author considers that it's not being dealt with properly and was publicized hastily, so he commits himself to doing a more kind of careful and patient analysis and giving the witness the benefit of the doubt. The work synthesizes, or this article synthesizes a view of the process followed for 10 years to unravel the reality of a supposed abduction attributed to ETs that seems to have changed the life of the protagonist. Let's see. So I don't know what I want to start actually, but yeah. So one summer day in 1946 or 47, it's not clear. Prospera, who was 7 or 8 at the time, and her sister Anna, who was 11 or 12, they're in a small house that their family had in the country outside Humila, which is in the province of Murcia in southern Spain. And they see a shiny object approaching over the fields, which at first they mistake for a car. They think that it's their father coming back, but then they realize it's probably not. And they start to get, or her sister starts to get nervous and urges her to close the window. They observe how the object silently passes a short distance from the window, lands a short distance from it. Anna tries to close the window, but this action is not completed when 2 men enter the door. And they're said to be wearing white one-piece outfits. Otherwise, they seemed completely normal to us. Now, that's a very interesting statement there, because later on, they would become very not normal, right? With each retelling of the story, and especially with the other appearances in the media that she made with other people, the beings who visited her became more and more strange and not like humans. So she described them initially as one of them looked young, sort of in his early 20s. The other one was considerably older, kind of in his mid 40s. She described like their hair being black and completely pasted on the skull, and the eyes were very black and piercing. And they talked about a calendar on the wall. They did not drink the water. So the beings did not drink the water. They were interested in the pots in the cupboard, and they talked about themselves, between themselves, about what seems to be something that would affect the girls in the future. So this is sort of high strangeness elements or absurd elements, like aliens visiting somebody, and then they start to, you know, look at random objects in a room or stuff like that. So this is present in this story as well. They talk about like a bright, intense light, and later being taken on board the craft into like a dome structure, and there's sort of like a metal gurney or something, or like a walkway and stuff like that inside the spaceship or the craft. And there's debates going on in Spanish ufology in the magazine Notes on Ufology, right? Requesting the opinion of several physicians, and there was actually a request or a offer to do proper, although when I say proper, I still think it's problematic, but hypno-regression, right? So trying to find out what the girls saw through hypnotic regression. And that was actually declined. But later on, this witness would go on a TV show in Spain, and she would later confess to the author of this piece that that was just a sham. Like there was no hypnotherapy there, and it was just, or hypnotic regression. It was just like for the cameras. So that's very problematic. But basically, this sort of, there's other people involved as well, other ufologists. She kind of comes to know all of them because they're all interested in the case. And she also describes the beings later on, and they start to sort of morph and look more different. And I think also at one point it's her husband who draws the aliens instead of her, but it's sort of taken to be what she saw, which is also kind of problematic. So the appearances of the aliens start to change more and more with each retelling. They become more like the Greys. She also had read a book by a Spanish ufologist at some point, and she probably assimilated some of the stuff in that book into her recollections. And the author of the piece comes to think that maybe she was like suffering from low self-esteem and depression, and that this could have been linked. Also, like there was apparently a serious family incident that could have been involved, relevant, but he doesn't disclose the nature of that out of privacy concerns. But all of these things could have played a very important role in her telling the story and why she's sort of stuck to doing this and making the story more elaborate over time. And more recently, her sister Anna was also doing this as well, kind of adding elements that she never talked about initially. And so it's sort of, there's several drawings there actually of the aliens, right? And he talks about why he's started to have doubts. And the aliens are on page, let's see, on page 195 of the PDF. Oh, sorry, of the book. It's page 196 of the PDF. There's a list of characteristics of the beings observed by the witness in her first experience. So small stature, bulky skull, fine face, very marked cheekbones, and some things which are kind of reminiscent of Greys and other things which are not. But I think over time they become more Grey-like. And yeah, she also eventually describes a red light, which she never talked about before. So yeah, what's going on? Also, elements like the helmet becomes translucent at some point. Right, you can see a picture there of her on TV on the show Who Knows Where in 1992. And she's supposedly being hypnotized. That's on page 199 of the PDF, 198 of the file. Right. So that's all very problematic. And the author is telling her that she shouldn't be doing this stuff because it's not good for her mental health. But obviously there is some sort of issue going on in terms of, or it's probably that she was enjoying the attention, or she was getting attention and she felt affirmed because she'd been suffering from low self-esteem, which, that could be an important aspect in encounter stories, actually. People might feel like their lives are not very interesting, or that they themselves are not very important. And so they want to sort of give themselves more of an importance. And maybe it's not that she made up the story completely. It's more that she had an experience that she couldn't explain, but she did not try to kind of explore what it could have been, really. And so she just allowed the embellishments to creep in, and she didn't really do her due diligence, despite her claims that she did. He lists some of the things like in the reflections section. So things that he thinks make the case suspicious in terms of the veracity of an alien encounter. right? There was no evidence left behind. There was some object which had purportedly been left behind by the aliens, but it was never found. The psychological test, X-rays, and MRI, which were proposed by Dr. Berchet, those were not done, even though there was an open offer to do them. And she seemed open to doing those, but later she said that she didn't want to have any more stuff done on her, basically. Yeah, so I mean that's basically it, really. Like, there's no aliens involved. It's just a case of an evolving story, which is very common in UFO cases, and elements being added on with each retelling, and also probably a self-esteem issue involved as well, which could have animated her, the story even more. Any thoughts?
So there was no evidence. They never took any imaging to find this supposed implant thing or object. Would expand it with the X. Yeah, so this case is basically, again, I take any case with a grain of salt that wasn't contemporaneously like reported at the time. Like this case didn't even come out until 40 years later, and I guess she started to remember in 1980, but it wasn't until 1982, after she read a UFO book by this Antonio Rivera guy, that she really started to kind of produce this story of hers. And so, like, it's a case that basically didn't even exist for 40 years, like that she didn't really start to put out until she was reading UFO books. Her husband apparently was a big UFO guy, into the UFO topic, and reading all these UFO books. I think I read somewhere, it turned out that like I said, a lot of this stuff we thought came from her turns out came from her husband. Like not just the drawings, but some of the testimony as well. Like I don't know if I misread that or not, but yeah, I mean, I think it's just the way that the case, like her initial things sound quite human. Like she had an encounter with a couple of guys, that she ran into. And then it just starts to get more weird, as like she gets more into the UFO topic and reads UFO books. And yeah, I mean, you just kind of have to, there's no evidence to support the case. And given the time period, I think it's probably she's just maybe she has some memories, some vague memories of sometimes she met some people like at the house that stopped by for something, and she integrated into a UFO story decades later. But
yeah, a really big I'm sorry.
I think you have to take it with a grain of salt, given the time, the way the story was developed later, and the way it came about after reading UFO books and stuff. Like, yeah.
Yeah, the way that he makes it sound in the chapter is, she was very involved in the UFO community. Basically, there were lots of investigators. Pretty much every major investigator was interested in her and interested in her story, and she found that basically rewarding, and so what he's saying is that she embellished the story over time because she was emotionally motivated to do so. And the ending of the chapter is also really interesting because she ended up going to another investigator, and they wrote a book that that changed, that basically changed the details of the investigation that the author here did. And I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the names, that Montiel did. And she also like blocked him on Facebook and stuff like that. So really very interesting case. But I am kind of curious as to like, what caused her to, to report the incident in the first place, for sure.
Yeah, I I think this happens a lot with witnesses, and this is how stories end up getting distorted. Is like a witness gets kind of captured by the UFO community. Like you look at people like Travis Walton and other witnesses that like literally become a member of the community, and through those various like they don't even intend to alter the story. There may not even be a conscious manipulation. Like they're not lying. Like I don't think the author of this paper thought this lady was lying at all. Like, but just through being involved in the UFO community, hearing all these other stories, you start to subconsciously like integrate elements of them, kind of reorganize and reframe your own experience to be more in line with the narratives you're hearing from the community. And so you kind of go through this process where you're just kind of like, your story changes over time, and you may not even realize you're doing it. You're just like subconsciously adjusting to the people you're around. And when you're around UFO people, your narrative can get really manipulative. And usually this is why I would say you got to go back to the original documents to see what they were saying at the time. But in this case, there was no original sighting at the time. This is all like developed later on. So I think she caught the UFO bug probably, and had some vague memories. And you see this happen. People start to mine their past memories for anything that seems unusual or weird, and try and reframe that in a UFO experience. So like when you have like a UFO flap, right? Like, and they see in the news, oh, people saw a lot of UFOs yesterday. Somebody might think, well, I did see a light yesterday. I didn't think anything of it yesterday, but maybe it was a UFO. Now that I think of it, it seemed kind of weird. And people start to like, they basically mine the memories for any kind of vague or ambiguous memory that perhaps seems somewhat weird or unexplained or unusual, and turn it into something, paranormal, when really it wasn't. It's just a vague, ambiguous memory from decades ago. So yeah, I don't think a lot of these people are outright lying. I think they're just mistaken.
Did you have anything that you wanted to add, Luis?
So Jeff brought up the thing about that this is not a contemporaneous case. Nice. That Jeff got that when he was abducted. Oh yeah, that was that was recovered.
Abducted in the TARDIS.
Yeah, I've got one like that, but of a later evolution of canine.
I've got a vintage stuffed canine that's like this big. That's like some sort of like mat thing. Like I bought it at a vintage toy store in Las Vegas like a decade ago. It's pretty sweet.
That's actually a real canine. It's just really small because it comes from like a miniature pocket universe that
he talks.
was abducted to.
Oh, master. No. Oh, where are you going? I've got Daleks over there. I've got 3 different TARDISes over here.
They're not contemporaneous. So we see this with like Roswell, right? After 79 when Berliner. Oh, nice. See, that's a UFO.
It's bigger. This is what Ross Coulthart's looking for. It's bigger on the inside than the outside.
Well, there was mention of something like that in one of the DIRDs, that you could have like a temporal displacement inside an object. Roswell was, when was the Roswell story broken open again? Was it 79?
Yeah, 79, I think.
Yeah. He
but it's got a mirror, so it's bigger on the inside
than
the outside.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, Roswell 79. Stanton Friedman was on like a TV show, and he got a call from somebody that knew Marcel.
Yeah. And the books were written around then.
By
the
first one with Burlett and more.
Yeah.
Charles Burlett, yeah.
So these stories can get buried for decades and then they reemerge for whatever reason. And, you know, of course, there's the Trinity story, which, like this one, involves children, Valet and Harris, not Kamala Harris, but Paola Harris, the lunatic. They go way overboard, you know, extracting every morsel of, you know, mystical meaning from these stories, which basically, you know, when people say that they saw something as a child, I kind of, my eyes glaze over. Like, it's like, here we go. I mean, it's not that their experiences aren't important. It's that if they're trying to talk, like, prove a UFO case, like, why would they expect me to take that seriously as a bona fide, bona fide? Is that how you say it? Actually, bona fide case, right? Like, they have, you know, why aren't people more humble about their experiences that they've had decades ago? Why is it that they just assume that, you know, we should take them seriously as, like, you know, accurate recollections of these extraordinary events? Is it a pathology, do you think, or is it just like a very common human trait?
Well, I don't think it's a pathology necessarily. You know, and I mean, I think that's a really good question. You know, why is it that people do that? And I think part of it is because, you know, they invest personal meaning into those experiences. And so, you know, once that becomes really a part of, you know, their personal narrative and how they construct them, their you know, their identity, then they can become really defensive. You know, they can come to protect that experience, basically. So, I mean, I don't think that, you know, when I hear people say stuff like that, I don't think that my eyes glaze over, because I think that there is some sort of truth there, even if it's, you know, not necessarily, how do I put this? I think that, you know, it becomes a part of them, you know, and so, you know, even if it might be dysfunctional, or it might be, you know, not based in reality in any way, you know, they don't see that, and it has a huge emotional impact on them, I think.
I think as far as why people choose, like, not the people with the experience, but as far as other people, why they choose to, like, accept these experiences from children decades after the fact, and why they take those memories and recollections seriously, is just, I think a lot of people just misunderstand how, like, memory really kind of works. A lot of people also kind of have this idea that any event that kind of, like, might have been traumatic, or like in a big event in someone's life, like you might imagine a UFO experience to be, is somehow going to be, like, ingrained in their memory accurately, and it's going to stay there for decades. Like, and so this is why, in kind of like legal cases, for example, when people report crimes like decades after the fact, or like report like that they were raped 30 years ago, like, for example, people take that as, like, you know, those memories as being more valid than perhaps they really are, because they get this idea that some sort of extreme event locks in that memory like a videotape in their brain, and it doesn't matter how much time passes, that it's going to be a pretty accurate memory, and that memory was created specifically because it was such a either traumatic or amazing event, or such a significant event that happened. But I just don't think that's actually true. That's not really how memory exactly works. And I think people put too much credit into old memories. I mean, to be honest, me personally, I'm going to take a UFO sighting from a child that happened last week with a grain of salt. I'm definitely going to take one that happened like 80 years ago with a grain of salt, particularly if they didn't even remember it for, you know, another several decades. So
yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with being skeptical, of course.
Yeah.
You know, I just think that it's really, really important not just to, you know, be respectful, but also to approach a witness with a respectful attitude, you know. But another thing that I would like to add too is that I think that when people have traumatic experiences, I'm not an expert, of course, but when people have traumatic experiences, the way that their memory of that event is processed in the brain is different from other memories. And so the traumatic memories can actually be, well, not necessarily accurate. They can have certain aspects to them that are extremely locked in and very vivid. And like people can have even, like triggers. Now, the term trigger, we use that in a very broad sense nowadays, but for someone with PTSD, a trigger can be something, a particular stimulus in their environment that they were around at the time of the traumatic event, such as like a sound or a scent, or and that can bring them back to that experience emotionally and stuff like that.
It can also be completely false. That trigger could have never been present at the original event, and it still reminds them of an event.
Has there been research into that, or?
I believe there's been quite a bit of research that shows like some of those key things that you supposedly remember from traumatic events are actually more wrong than right.
Interesting.
More wrong, but could there still be like a core of truth?
Yeah, it could still be a core. Just like there could be something that happened. It's just your recollection of what happened is a bit wrong, right? Like I know personally, and like without using names, I know personally someone that has some false memories. And because I was there, I know what cores of truth they got from them, right? Like they pulled things from different time periods, like literally 7 years, like separate from when they think this happened, and integrated these different memories into this new kind of false memory. And like this person believes they were abused, but like it's literally physically not possible. The abuser wasn't even in the same state in those years at the same time period. So you can see where they get some of these memories from, that there's elements of truth to. It's just together is not really an accurate representation of what happened.
Yeah. And we also saw a lot of that in the satanic scares, right?
Satanic ritual abuse, panic.
That had a lot of negative spillover. Like a lot of people were accused of stuff that they never did.
Yeah.
That's true. And I think that it is. I think in some of these cases, it's possible for people to become traumatized by things that never happened to them.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me. I don't know what is going on with my stomach. I hope that people can't hear that. My stomach,
and I don't think it even
little groans.
Yeah, and I also don't think it necessarily means that they never experienced any trauma. Like they've suffered from real trauma. It's just that like some of the trauma they think they experienced didn't happen, and it's been the trauma they did experience has been replaced with something different, like a false memory, right? Like, and I think you see that a lot in the UFO topic, right? There is like, and this isn't just like theoretical. There are people that have, like, for example, used abductions to cover up, sexual abuse. I mentioned before, one of Bud Hopkins, famous witnesses I went by, I believe the name Beth in one of his books, that supposedly had a child from an alien, a hybrid or whatever, and then they lost the baby. Turns out the story was to cover up a case of incest, abuse, and impregnation that the girl had. It was easier to hide behind like a UFO abduction than it was to address the actual trauma that they experienced. So there could be real trauma. It's just that what they're saying happened didn't actually happen. It's covering something else that really did happen.
Yeah, and I've read stuff by like Susan Clancy. I don't really remember Clancy's work well enough, but I was reading some of her stuff about trauma specifically. I've read that, and she kind of argues basically that trauma isn't real, pretty much. I think I could be misrepresenting what she said, but she really kind of downplays trauma and traumatic experiences a lot. So I need to review that stuff. Don't take what I'm saying right now with a big grain of salt too, because I don't really remember very clearly.
Why is there so much salt recently? First, because of my article in Scientific American, there was a bunch of salt, and now we have to take, grains of salt.
It's the era. It's the era of salt. We are the salty ones.
People got tired of all those fairies with their no salt in their foods. That we've got to bring the salt back. People thought Joe didn't have salt in his pancakes. Sorry to tell you, he had salt in his pancakes. Things are salty. That's just how it is.
I'm sorry, yeah, but a lot of these superstitions around fairies, they are just not true. Sorry, I'm around iron and salt like all the time. I do not have any problems, unless I eat too much salt. Then it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm laughing at your clown nose. So a couple of things. There it is. I want to start, and I might have difficulty doing this at first, but I want to start actually mentioning some of the comments that people leave that contain useful feedback. And one of them actually was from Brian Sentes, who watched the video of our book club on Susan Palmer's chapter about Claude Vorilhon.
What did he say?
And he said Susan Palmer is likely the authority on the international Rael movement. She wasn't embedded, but had access to the NRM, that's a new religious movement, while they were centered in Montreal. Rael and the movement at the time were very open to being visited, canvassed, and studied. So leave us a comment, give us some feedback, and or you can also, as always, provide constructive feedback in the chat, and we will
get better
share
checking
that on the show. What's that?
I need to get better at checking the comments. So, like I say, if you have a question like about say my presentation, put it in the comments, and I'll try and answer it on the next episode, the next chat, or whatever, But I need to get better. Good thing you're checking those out because I haven't been.
Well, in any case, I get notifications because I'm always in the studio, and I'm the only person that has access to it right now. So I will try to make a note of that before the shows. Maybe I'll just put notes in the script. Maybe that's what I should do. Also, I had an interview with Tim Banal a couple weeks ago that I sounded like a crazy fool. I'm really just terrible at just talking on the fly. But I thought it went pretty well.
Yeah.
What's that?
I listened to it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, okay. Anything else anyone wanted to talk about before we go?
I've been reading Gregor Gysian's book, which is excellent. Very, very good overview of the international UFO scene from when it started. And he goes into the contactees really well, I thought. Another book I read, people might want to check it out. It's called Are We Alone by Paul Davies, who's a physicist. And he goes into SETI and all that, Fermi paradox. And also this book, Light of the Stars, Alien Worlds and the Fate of the Earth by Adam Frank. So he's thinking about using, the Drake equation. It's got a L, big L term for the average length of a civilization. He's thinking about how do we use that sort of thinking to help our chances of making it through the future. Because we have to think at a sort of planetary level with all the feedbacks and coupled systems that we now know about in Earth system science, and how a civilization is like a thermodynamic system, interacting with its planet, its host planet. So how do we apply that sort of planetary thinking to, being more serious as a species, he likens us to teenagers, right? Troubled teenagers who don't have any other examples to lean on. But then, like, when they think in a more universal sense, they can think, oh, well, maybe we're not alone in this. You know, like when teenagers are talking to other teenagers about their problems, that's sort of like what we are right now. Initially, like, we don't have any, aliens to talk to, but even just like the thought about what would it be necessary to do for a civilization to survive, could be very enlightening to helping us to make it through the future.
Yeah, I think something I've been thinking about a lot is, taking care of yourself before taking care of others. Like, you got to take care of yourself before you take care of other people. And I think that kind of applies here in a way. Like, we have to take care of our planet before we can start worrying about, what we're going to do in the far off future. And also, I think I was going to say something about the term civilization, but I feel like in this context, it's a little bit different. That, like, people use this term civilization when they talk about, like, aliens and stuff like that. But in a lot of contexts, I think the term civilization is kind of problematic because it kind of...
He's only talking about civilizations capable of doing radio communication.
Mhm.
They've reached a certain industrial and scientific level. Like, obviously Rome was a civilization, but he's not counting that in his analysis because he's thinking, this large scale industrial setup, how does it interact thermodynamically with its home planet?
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is that, like, in anthropology, the term civilization is frequently termed problematic because in the past, anthropologists and scholars have kind of used it as a way of putting certain cultures above other cultures pretty arbitrarily, and it's associated with a lot of racism and stuff like that. But for me, thinking about aliens, and alien life, I kind of wonder, if we saw like an alien species that was intelligent or something like that, and I think we might have talked about this on the show before, but if we saw an alien species that that had a level of intelligence, let's call it like just a certain level of being able to process information systematically and use that to change the environment to its benefit or something like that. What's the probability that an alien species would do that in the same way that humans do it? Like, would it even remotely look anything like what we imagine?
Well, I mean, thermodynamically, it would have to, if we're talking about reproducing in organisms, like if that's how life functions, and we're thinking about how do you increase your population, how do you extract energy from a planet? It's just, that's what he's considering in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to read the book, but I don't think that necessarily. What I'm saying is that aliens might not be individual animals. They could be funguses, they could be plants. But they're
and
that's
still
not
organisms.
even that's not even getting to industrial revolutions, right? And I mean, industrial technology, I feel, is just not sustainable. So that's where I'm coming from with that. Like, it's just caused so much damage to the environment and is continually contributed to global climate change. So if we are going to become like a spacefaring species, we really have to completely change the way that we make technology and the way that we make infrastructure on a fundamental level.
Yeah, he doesn't dispute that.
Yeah.
By the way, fungi and plants are organisms. So, I mean, we can imagine aliens being very different to us, but I mean, if they still have metabolism, if they still convert, if they still have like a chemical system at disequilibrium to maintain their high level of organization, then that still applies. I think there are certain things which all life would necessarily have.
I agree. I agree entirely with that. Yeah, absolutely.
He's just using it more like a scale, like the Kardashev scale, like as a scale of the level of development on a planet. Like it's not actually about like the anthropological like interpretation of the civilization of the culture. It's just an indicator that they can broadcast radio waves, or they can harvest the energy of their stars, or they can do this or that. Like it's not really speaking as to any individual like cultural groups or people on the planet. It's just
I'm not even saying that, but I do think that it has some. I do think that the way that we conceptualize civilization definitely, is important to consider when we're thinking about alien species and alien intelligence, for sure. Because if we're misconceptualizing our own, groups and our own intelligence, then we're going to have problems being able to figure out what other aliens are like. But I definitely think that absolutely that the laws of thermodynamics and entropy, they're universal, and so life is going to, if there, life as a system, if it develops on other planets, which is very probable, I think that that's probably the case, then it's going to look something like life on Earth, even if it's on a fundamental level a little bit different. It's still going to operate along some of the same principles, and we'll still have evolution, and they'll still have ecologies and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I say, physics is the same. It's going to be the same anywhere in the universe. So, like, whatever the difference is, like, they'd still have to, kind of develop, you would think, along the same kind of technological progression, because that's just physics, right? Like, so, like,
he talks about sort of how, if you get up to a certain level, you'd have to like maybe start off with hydrocarbons, burning them, and you can switch over later on to something different, maybe like solar or geothermal. But there might be some sort of, you might be constrained initially to using certain technologies.
Yeah, like, I think that,
the same development hurdles we did, like it's not like they would just instantaneously develop some more advanced, better technology to use than hydrocarbons. Like you would think that they would go through the same kind of evolutionary technological developments we did, in a sense.
I don't think that's true. I don't think that's
because that's not about us or personal biases or culture. Like that's physics. That's what would happen just by definition.
I mean, I think that it's physically possible that aliens could develop the same sorts of technologies that we do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they would, because, like I said, they might not be, a pro-social species like us. They might be a eusocial species, right? So they might not be motivated to develop technologies in the same way, or like consider, different cultures in different parts of the world. And the cultures in the Americas, they didn't develop all the same technologies that they did in the old world. So they used other technologies to get around them sometimes and stuff like that. Like they didn't use carriages, they didn't use wheels a lot of the time, so they would have like runners and stuff like that. They didn't. I just don't, so imagining like a different species, which might not even be animals, or that might just have radically different ways of organizing its society. I could imagine that their technology could be really, really different and could go along very, very different trajectories.
Yeah, but I mean, he doesn't deny that.
Yeah.
He's not even making a case about like whether the aliens are communists or capitalists or anything. It's just like a very, very basic, like very minimal assumptions about the idea that to have lots of individuals and in industry, you would need to extract energy from the environment. That's basically it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is I mean, like animals have industry, and they don't rely on hydrocarbons. So, like, I don't think that I could ever imagine ants like evolving to the point that they started using hydrocarbons, because why would they need to? I don't know.
Yeah, but they wouldn't. No, I guess he's thinking in terms of manipulate. I mean, he's thinking about like what is it necessary to what is necessary in order to have radio communications.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, just ancient technology, yeah, it's technology to move a plow around and to dig up the ground. That's a form of technology. But I think we're talking about like more advanced, like electric, like radio communications, like more advanced technology. And in order to get there, one, like physically, you have to have, say, opposable things that you can manipulate and build and construct and do things with, to even, like, I think, to create technology. So biologically speaking, you really have to like have, you know, digits and things you can build and manipulate with, because otherwise how do you build and manipulate things to create this technology in the first place? And then to get to the point of like technology like radio waves and things like that, and actual like what we consider technology nowadays, like I think that's more along the lines like, yeah, you can argue that there was technology hundreds of years ago that they did and it was, you know, good for the environment, they didn't use hydrocarbons or whatever, but like that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about like technology like we consider technology now.
Yeah, I mean, like radio waves are produced in nature, so if a planet has an electromagnetic field, it produces radio waves, right?
But that's not technology.
Right, but I'm just saying, like, if there's radio waves in nature, I don't know. I'm just trying to play around with this radio thing, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure. I might not be on the same wavelength.
That's very wavelength.
But also the other thing too is that life forms could evolve. I could totally see life forms evolving the ability to create radio waves, right? Because there's life forms that produce electricity, you know, and there are a lot of different life forms do utilize the Earth's electromagnetic field. So, you know, I don't see it being too. I mean, we have little, you know, we use ATP and we have mitochondria and stuff like that. So we have little power generators in our cells, and we use electrical charges to move, you know, to make our brains work and stuff like that. So I could totally see like a life form just evolving the ability to use radio waves, right?
Yeah, but conceivably, we still have to think of an evolutionary pathway. I mean, it's easy to say that you can imagine it, but like, it might not actually be true, possible.
That's true, but at the same time, I think that considering the invention of radio on another planet is also a super, super narrow possibility, and I think that, you know, I tend to view alien life not in, you know, the way of being like very similar to humans, but probably being very different. I think that, to me, sounds to be like the more probable thing. So if life forms on other planets became able to travel through space or to communicate with other life-bearing planets, I'm not even going to use the term civilization here because I think that narrows the possibilities. Setting aside the whole anthropology thing, just talking about alien life, right? Because if we come in contact with alien life, it probably will not be coming to contact with a species of these, you know, pro-social individuals that, you know, that develop the same kinds of technology that we do. I think it'll probably be something completely different, you know, because
it's life, Jim, but not as you know it. Not as you know it. Not as you know it. It's life, Jim, but not as you know it.
Exactly, Bones. Wait, what is that from? Actually, is that from
old song, old Star Trek? I forget who sings it. God, I forget. Yeah.
Oh, okay. One other thing I wanted to say too about
Star Trekkin'. It's the song Star Trekkin' by the novelty band The Firm. Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to say about the your piece, Jeff, you were talking about the Nuremberg marvel, and also in connection with the Tübingen case, which I have not gotten a chance to read Show and Obik's collection, but it's basically talking about, I just wanted to point this out on the show, it's basically talking about exactly this thing that I was talking about back in the UFO Detox Hour in my segment on Orbs of Dusk and Dawn. They, in the introduction, they basically describe the exact same thing, and so I really want to read that, but and I'm going to as soon as I get the chance. But because there was also another sighting reported in newspapers in 1880 that Jeff had posted, that took place in a small rural town in Kentucky that sounds very, very similar to the Nuremberg sighting. And I don't know if Obek is actually even aware of that sighting, so you might want to share it with him, because I bet he'd be interested.
I'm sure he is. I'm sure he is.
Because I think an interesting hypothesis that I will bring up again is that it could be some sort of rare optical phenomenon caused by particular weather conditions. William Corliss had presented several cases of reports of kaleidoscopic suns, so maybe it's something like that. But again, that's just another thing that's been reported that I don't think has really been well documented enough to show that it actually happens.
Yeah. But that other case, Erica Carius in Sweden, which is in the 1880s, that I'm gonna do next week.
1806
is also 1806. Sorry, is also fairly similar to the Tübingen one, anyways. So
yeah, it was a case of WAFs.
It's another solar bubble case. Yeah. I also just wanted to quickly point out, people should check out, before Greg wrote that book after the flying saucers came, about 10 years ago, he actually started to publish a couple papers kind of on this topic. He published one in 2014 called A Transatlantic Buzz, Flying Saucers, Extraterrestrials, and America in Post-War Germany, in the Journal of Transatlantic Studies, that I posted a link there. And then he did another great one called Making UFOs Make Sense, Ufology, Science, and the History of Their Mutual Distrust, which I also highly recommend reading. So while his book only just recently came out, he's actually been in this for a while doing the research. And I do not have the physical book. I've listened to the audiobook, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good kind of introduction to the topic that was perhaps a bit better than a lot of kind of introductions to the topic. And it's out with Oxford Press, so people should check that out, his book as well.
Okay, I really wish Amy was here. Need to get more girls in the chat. What is it with all the boys? I don't get it.
It's just
feels
people.
So lonely.
No, I don't really pay attention. People is people.
Okay. Well, one day we'll have guests on the show as well. I'm just kind of holding that off for now, but when we do that, then we'll have more girls on the show, not just me. But thank you for joining the chat, Tim and Simon. And for our final story, a scintillating spring of time spaced out. Non-inconsequential penumbrations flammed across the Parliament of Owls Wednesday as a Korg of Clun shifted saucerward across a mush of scoops. In west central eastern northwest by easterly North Texarkana, bowelfuls of mass told the New York Times, quote, "Why can't you hear me?" unquote. Unable to respond, reports acted as though this was all quite normal. One reporter thought something which was worthy of note but didn't go on the record. It was all quite sensible. Elon Musk, meanwhile, ate an imaginary turnip, which he then spat out 300 times into his own voluminous, while all of a sudden American political discourse made sense for one femto archon. Orange! The solace was bemused, but only ironically. Before we go, if you enjoy this show, we would like you to please consider subscribing to our channel, Ufo Sunset. Please also hit the like button and hit the notification bell icon if you'd like to get notified about upcoming videos. And come and join our cozy and intimate live chat. Metaphorically speaking, a great plus for joining the live chat is that you can give us constructive feedback live on the air, especially if we make any factual errors. You can also join our Discord, a temporary link to which will be placed in the episode description after the show. Here at Ufos, our political and personal views are not the same, and the work of each of us is independent work. Personal views or positions expressed in individual pieces are not necessarily those of Ufos, who is not a person and has no views, or myself. Please be sure to check out our respective content. I can be found right here, right now. Visit Luis Cayetano's website, ufologyiscorrupt.com, and you can find Jeff Knox's daily posts on history and the science of UFOs on Twitter or Facebook. Jeff Knox spends all of his time studying UFOs, and he doesn't make any money off of it. Please consider visiting his Patreon page and becoming his patron. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you, Kevin and Ben, Jeff's patrons. Please consider also contributing to Jeff's Ko-Fi, and thank you to the people in chat. Let's have a moment of silence before we go. Any parting words, Luis? Before you die? No, I'm just kidding. No?
I do have a thread for the next book chapter, the Polish case, that people can find on my Twitter. So if they want to read about that case in addition to the chapter.
Oh, that's going to be the chapter that we talk about next week or next time. And hopefully next time we'll also cover chapter 16 as well. What are you looking at, Jeff? Is there a UFO?
Yeah, I think so. It's a green orb that's just hovering.
Oh, sweet.
Don't worry, I'll forget to record it, and I won't set up any cameras to collect any evidence. And I definitely won't
have a camera right there. You can just turn it around.
What? Security cameras? And I won't do 100 podcasts where I never mention any of the orbs I'm apparently seeing at my house until I decide to publish a book about it. Yeah. All right.
All right. In the words of the disc, who do UFOs think they are?